Now, like chapter 3, chapter 6 is a tale of court conflict and intrigue. More specifically, chapter 6 is a story of the demise and vindication of a minister of the state. Now, Daniel has achieved prominence in the imperial administration and favor with the king. The other ministers of the state are envious, and they want to exploit some kind of wrongdoing against Daniel. However, they're unable to do so because Daniel is a man of integrity and consistency. No corruption can be found against him because he has a God-fearing character. Now, realizing they will not be able to find legitimate grounds against Daniel in his work ethic, the other ministers of the state go after his faith. They plot to engineer his downfall by getting the king to issue a statute that Daniel will not obey, but which carries a capital sentence. They watch for his disobedience, report it to the king, and insist that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den. Now, Daniel is not only a man of wisdom and uprightness, but also a man of faithfulness to God, both in life and in prayer. The moral of the story is this: Daniel trusts God in hopeless circumstances. He believes in obeying God rather than human beings when these two obligations conflict, even though his faithfulness will cost him his life. Now, even the king can't rescue him, yet the king is open to the possibility that God may do so. Grieved that he cannot help Daniel, the king says to him,
"May the God whom you serve continually rescue you."
A stone is brought and placed over the opening of the den. Now it is sealed by the king, who spends the night anxiously wondering what Daniel's fate will be. He does not eat. He does not accept entertainment. He just waits. At sunrise, the king rushes to see what has become of Daniel. He calls out to him,
"Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?"
Now, to the king's pleasure, Daniel has indeed been rescued. God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, and Daniel is left unharmed. Now, angered at those who plotted against Daniel, the king gives them and their families the same death sentence, the lion's den, and they are crushed even before they hit the floor. Now, this teaches us that our actions bear consequences not only for us, but also for those whom we love. After Daniel's deliverance, the king enjoins his whole empire to recognize Daniel's miraculous and unequaled God. Now, what an amazing parallel to the gospel story. Jesus' accusers, like those of Daniel, will eventually pay for their hostility, along with their children. Jesus, like Daniel, is arrested at his customary place of prayer. Pontius Pilate, like King Cyrus, finds no fault in him, tries to free him, but is reminded that the law forbids it. And Jesus, like Daniel, has to rely on God to deliver him, as his tomb is sealed by a stone. Now, though Jesus actually dies and injury can be found on him after he comes back from the dead, it makes for an even more extraordinary story that very early at sunrise, Jesus, like Daniel, is discovered to be alive. Exegetical notes. Verse 3 states that Daniel so distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities. The Hebrew is literally Daniel's remarkable spirit and is of supernatural origin. Verse 3 states that the king had set Daniel over the whole kingdom. Perhaps God wanted Daniel in this position of influence to encourage and assist in the Jews' return to Judah, since the return was made in Cyrus's first year between 539 and 537 BC, right before the lion's den incident. Verse 7 mentions the lion's den. The term for lion's den in Hebrew is pit, which is an ordinary word for an underground cistern used for water storage or as a prison. Access was from the top, thus being lowered in or lifted out. In verse 8, those who plotted against Daniel wanted the king to put the decree in writing. Once enacted, even the king could not change Medo-Persian law. Verse 10 states that Daniel prayed just as he had done before. Daniel was uncompromising in his commitment to seek the Lord. Verse 14 states that the king was greatly distressed. A better translation for distressed is displeased. The king is perhaps displeased with Daniel for ignoring his injunction, or perhaps with the ministers of the state for engineering Daniel's downfall, or perhaps with himself for being manipulated into becoming the victim of his own power and authority. In verse 22, Daniel states that God sent his angel. Like his friends in the blazing furnace, Daniel receives help from a heavenly aid. In verse 23, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. The message of Daniel 6 is hardly that the innocent, believing confessor can always expect to be saved from martyrdom. Some are saved and some bring God glory through their death. The reader is no doubt entitled to rejoice in the story's promise of divine protection. God does grant a victory of life over death, of innocence over guilt, of justice over enmity, of hope over fear. He who loses his life will save it.